Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April session of Dr. Spotfire. Today, we're going to be talking about spatial joins and other geoanalytics tips. My name's Neil Kanungo, and I'll be your host today. This session is going to have a lot of different examples in it, so I'll be putting timestamps to the different topics in the YouTube video description for the recording, so you can jump through it if you're viewing on YouTube. Now, our motto is learning is not driven by answers, but by questions. And recently, this has become very real for us, very much a fact of analytics with the COVID-19 analysis. I'm sure we're all being affected in some way by the coronavirus. I hope that everyone out there is doing well, given the coronavirus situation. And I think we're all looking for answers. And our data science team has been working very hard to analyze coronavirus data, COVID-19 data, which we'll show a little bit today in our examples. And the more we analyze, the more that happens every day, the more questions we all have. And that is actually driving a lot of what we choose to analyze. So again, learning is not driven by answers, but by questions. So I wanted to quickly mention the Spotfire 10 Enablement Hub that's on YouTube. There's 30 videos, over 30 videos there. They're all free. Something we launched a couple months ago, so you can find it on the YouTube channel. Put a link to all this in the chat in a moment. And I also want to mention the TIBCO Academy. So that has recently launched as well in the past couple months. The TIBCO Academy is official training provided by the TIBCO Education Department that has online e-learning that includes quizzes and labs, different videos. It has 2 levels. There's a fundamental level and an advanced level. And these allow you to kind of go through exercises. The Academy is about $900 to $1,000 per year per person. So it is paid to get access to the labs. But you can also start doing certification through the Academy and sign up for live training. So there's different paid services with the Academy. If you just want some quick help with getting started with Spotfire for free, you can go to the YouTube references that are here. And today, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the session. My name, again, is Neil, and I'm a data scientist at TIBCO. And your Dr. Spotfire, and I'm joined with a personal mentor of mine, Peter Shaw, who actually teaches me quite a bit about data science and geoanalytics, and he's going to be showing some examples today as well. So let's jump right in. Let's see here. Let me close that. Let's jump right in, and I'm going to start from this is a COVID-19 starter DXP. So this is something that we have available on the internet for you to download. You can go to tibco.com/COVID-19 to get a link to the interactive dashboard that we've been using to show our COVID insights. And you can also go to looks like that. Here we go. That loads. So it might be taking a second. There's a lot of people on it. There's also the COVID-19 starter template, and that's what I'm going to be building off of today. You can download this DXP and get access to the data and a direct link to new data that's updating every day. And it looks like this is loaded now. This is the live report that we have updating every day, and we're adding new analysis to over time. So this session, just a little forewarning, I know a lot of people have been asking for guidance with R and Python. This is going to be a particularly heavy session for R. It's mostly going to be some advanced topics. I'm going to show some basic things to start with, but it will be mostly advanced topics. And if you're familiar with R, you can get a lot of value out of this. There's a lot you can do with geospatial capabilities in Spotfire using TER and R. Things from simple spatial joins, but also some more exotic things we'll show because you have the flexibility of R. So I'm going to give some pointers on how to get started with some of that. Now, we have a lot of the data functions shared on the exchange, the TIBCO exchange, where you can find different geospatial functions and things to download, points and polygons and Voronoi polygons, things like that are all on the TIBCO exchange. There's also a page on location analytics, and I'll put these in the chat in a second. But this has a lot of different examples, and at the bottom has lots of different helper functions that you can use to, calculate the area of polygons, convert polygons to convert coordinates to polygon geometries, draw circles. We'll show some of this today, and you can hit this link to jump to a page that has more of these helper functions with examples. So some of these are already available to you on the TIBCO community, but there are some other scripts that we've just developed recently that are not published yet, and just kind of full transparency, it does take us some time. It can take quite some time for us to get legal approval to share code. So I'll just be walking through the code, but it might be some time before they're actually posted directly on the community for download. You might have to kind of just go through the video for that. So for today, I wanted to start again with the COVID-19 DXP, and this allows you to pull Johns Hopkins public data. You can hit this button. I'm not going to do it now, but this will pull the latest data. This DXP was last updated on the 5th of April, and this is going to reach out to the Johns Hopkins GitHub site and pull the most recent case counts, deaths, recoveries for countries and United states within the U.S., within the United States. And there's also a lot of other tables in here that you can use, like population from the U.S. Census Bureau, population by U.S. county, by U.S. state, by world countries. We have some virulence data on different diseases and how they compare to each other. And there is a lookup table, which is how we've actually corrected some of the data issues in the Johns Hopkins geocoding. And the way they've documented their countries and regions, things like that. So I'm going to show that to start with is geocoding. So a very simple example is I have this map. I don't have any layers in this really. I'm going to add a layer here. I'm going to add a feature layer, which is going to create a geometry layer. And I want to bring in all of the world country information on cases, deaths, and recoveries. So if I hit that, it's going to, you see this doing this automatic geocoding. And that happens when you're connected to your Spotfire library. And what this has done is if I look at the actual table on the, let's see, the final world countries data. So this is a data I was using. If I look at this, you'll see that there's no shapes in here. It's just raw data on the counts. And the geocoding has reached into the Spotfire library, which you can see, and if you go browse the library, there's a folder that's Geoanalytics that should be at the root level. And there's different geocoding tables in there for different regions of the world. And it's reached out and it's grabbed that and it's automatically plotted this. Now we see the United States, it's missing here. There's some missing countries here. And so we'll take a step further and look in detail here. And here on the geocoding, we see that it's taken the world countries geocoding table, but it's looked at continent and country region. So there might be some names that don't match there. What I recommend using for the geocoding for the country level is actually the country ISO 3, which is a standardized code that's provided in the actual data set. And you'll see that this has no match available, but I'll hit auto match and it's going to look in this world countries table and find a country ISO 3 code. And there you go. Now it's actually plotted all those countries correctly for the available data. Within this DXP, there are some predefined color schemes that we use for the dashboard that we share. So I have a logarithmic color scale for cases, and I can hit that. Now you can see the cases around the world on a logarithmic scale. Now there's a labels as well. So I'm going to label this by just the color by values. I'm coloring this by the total number of cases. So when I turn that on, you'll see the total cases. Now I used sum there, and that's going to be summing all the historical values. What I really want is the maximum. So this is going to be the maximum per day. And since it's a cumulative count, the maximum is going to give me the latest value. And so now you can see these labels here. And something that's new in Spotfire 10.8 is you can see that this label isn't quite centered. Some of these labels are maybe not where I want them. You can actually right click and hit edit label positions, and you can move these labels around however you would like. And then you can unclick that, and now those labels will be adjusted. So that's new in Spotfire 10.8. Next, I'm going to move on to some hospital data that we've brought in from an open source hospital data set. And I'm going to, I have these counties in here. This is brought in from a geocoding table. I went ahead and prepped that, but here I just have the actual country. A quick tip you can do here is you can go into the positioning, and you can actually take these columns, if it's a marker layer, and you can bin them. So I'm going to auto bin these columns, and we're going to look at the US, and these are kind of all over the place, not very useful. That binning is too large. So I can adjust this binning here, and now you'll see that these are actually binned. And so the values that are close together are now combined on top of each other in a single bin. And I can color this by, let's say, the number of ICU beds. I can change the shape to maybe something like a square if I'd like. And I can do that, and maybe change the colors if I'd like to something that is maybe a little more representative of what I'm trying to show. So that is that data binned. Now, this data we got, this hospital data that we had, let me just undo all this. This hospital data is, we didn't have county level information on this. So what we had on this hospital data is we had just different information about the location, the latitude, longitude, the addresses, but we have county level COVID-19 case data, and we want to bring that together. So how do we take all these individual locations and put those together on the county level? How do we assign the right counties here? It can be quite a tedious process, but there is a data function on the Exchange called points and polygons. And using the points and polygons data function, which I've already set up, but I'll walk through, this is going to find, it's going to look at all the points, and it's going to look at the polygons that are surrounding those points. They're essentially geofenced by those points, and it's going to assign it a value from those polygons. So these polygons have a county code. And so when I go to this and I set it up, I essentially set the geometry. So I'm taking my US counties. There's a geometry column in there. I'm taking that. The ID I want to use is a county code that's a unique identifier for each county. And then the points I want to use are from my hospital data. So I use my X value for longitude, my Y value for latitude. And then the output, it's just going to output an ID column, which goes appended to my hospital data. So this is going to take the counties, and it's going to append it to the actual hospital data. So you can see that here, this added column has been added, and now I have an ID here, which is all the county codes. And I can rename that if I'd like, but right here, it's just the ID showing all the county codes. And so if I went here and I actually colored this by those county codes, you'll see that, I'll color this by ID. Here, you'll see just kind of high level that all the points that are within a certain polygon have the same color because they have the same ID. And so this shows me that it's correctly assigned the county codes to each of the individual hospitals. So that's a points and polygons way of doing kind of a spatial join. And I'm just looking at the time here. We have quite a few things to show, so we'll probably go over the 30 minutes today, just to give you a heads up. I'll have probably another 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to show some of the other spatial join aspects before handing off to Peter. So next is is another simple data function that will go draw a circle. So here I've taken, the hospitals are shown in red, but these little blue points are the top 1,000 cities in the United States by population. So the top 1,000 most populous cities. And there's a data function where you can again find this on the community. This data function is draw circles with a fixed radius on a geographical point. So here in my my parameters, you just select your point. So I've selected my US cities, the longitude and latitude, my circle radius, which I've tied to a document property, and this is corresponding to this slider. So I've used a document property. I've set a property control in here to be able to allow me to move the slider. And then depending on what unit you want to use, you have to put an earth radius in, and that is in the script. So like if I want to use miles, I use this value. If I want to use kilometers, there's a different value. And that is, where is it? Here we go. In the script, you can find those values here for this value for miles and this for meters. And sorry, I apologize. I am actually doing this in meters. So, or kilometers. So this is showing the, this is actually calculating now and showing the different boundaries around the fixed radius around each city. And next, I wanted to do a spatial join with this. So I want to find the hospitals that are within a certain fixed boundary of these hospitals or of these cities using this this slider. This takes a minute to compute because it's got to look at all of these 1,000 different points. You can see, you might have seen it just slightly updated for this 11. It just updated these boundaries here. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about under the hood on how these geometries and things work in Spotfire. So I'm going to go to column properties, and I'm going to show you in circles. This is the circles that are drawn, and I'm going to show you the column properties. Now, this is something Peter and I kind of call the secret sauce. If you are using geometries, lines, or polygons in Spotfire, Spotfire reads that as a binary. That's just ones and zeros. That's how it's read in Spotfire. But you need to tell Spotfire that this binary, and a binary can be anything. It can be an image, which we might show later. It can actually be like a image, a photo. It can be shapes. It can be entire tables of data. It can be binaries. Can be anything. Really. So to tell Spotfire that it is a geometry, you need to have on content type, you need to have this text in there. Now that's automatically done by our data function, so nothing's needed. But if you are building your own data functions, this is something to pay attention to make sure that your column has this value in there. So that is, one step under the hood. Now, next I'm going to show how we're going to do a spatial join. So here, I've done a spatial join that has each of these boundaries, and the hospitals you can see are colored a particular color if it's within a boundary. And that's because the hospitals have been assigned a value that says it's closest to this city. So I essentially have two marker layers here. I have a layer that is just the hospitals. And let me see, let me turn on my layers control so we can do this. So let me turn off the circle. So I have a layer that is just the hospitals, all these points, and I have a layer that is just the cities. Maybe a little hard to see, but there's the cities. Now I want to join these together, but the points are never going to overlap directly, kind of like we did points and polygons with the counties. So I want to have a boundary. I want to say if something is within a certain distance, then assign these two marker layers together. So in this example, we're doing this with hospital data to see the hospitals that are closest, that are within these boundaries. And really the circles are only there for illustrative purposes. You don't really need this for the spatial join that I'm about to show you. Other ways that this is useful, I actually had this example when I was at my previous employer, where we had 7 different asset databases for different facilities around the country. There was a lot of mergers and acquisitions and in the past, and basically different facilities all had different names, had mostly different names across different asset databases. And so how do you assign a unified name? How do you start to bring these together? Well, by doing a spatial join and taking each of these asset databases had a latitude and longitude. And by saying, okay, if something's within, I don't know, 100 yards, then it's probably the same facility. We were able to join the 7 different asset databases and their metadata into one table and look at it. And then that cleaned up 97% of the data, and things where maybe the points were wrong. It might be like the last 3% of data, but overall the process took us less than 20 minutes to join up 7 different asset databases together. So the spatial joins is useful for bringing, you're used to joins on tables where you join by columns, and you can add different columns together with SQL joins. A spatial join is quite similar, but instead of joining by column values and having exact column exact matches in your column values, you're actually joining in space and a spatial distance. So for this data function, so I actually just wrote this last night, and I'm going to go through a little bit of steps. I think it's not too complicated, but what I'll go through just kind of the basics, and then I'll kind of point out some of the key things to keep in mind when you're doing this type of stuff yourself. So, one key package I use is SP, and that's because that creates what's called a spatial data frame, and that allows R to work with spatial objects better, lines and geometries and points, and do just different spatial functions. So I brought in that, and then I brought in some different data table management type packages. I have some values here for the distance that is going to be my cutoff. I have a buffer distance, which is just my value, and then a distance unit, which is the unit I'll multiply by if I want it to be in miles or feet or whatever. So this can be 10, and then this tells them this tells the script should it be 10 miles or kilometers or whatever. Now, just for my debugging purposes, I just overwrote that, and I'm using a fixed value of 30 kilometers here. So that's what this will all use. And so then I'm going to construct 2 data frames. One is going to be the layer 1 longitude and latitude, and a unique identifier for it. So this can be the hospital IDs, or if it's the cities, it can be the city name. That's going to be a unique identifier. So I do that for layer 1. I do the same thing for layer 2. One layer again being hospitals, the other ones being the cities. And then I construct a matrix, then I clean out any missing values. So if there's anything missing from that data set, I don't want to use that in my calculation if I have any missing lat longs or unique identifiers. And then I construct a matrix, just a matrix of latitudes and longitudes for each layer. And that's to be used with this function spdists. And this is a function that's in the SP package, which will calculate a matrix of distances from every point in one layer to every point in another layer. And this uses this lat long true tells it that it's actually on the surface of the Earth. Now, you might think to yourself, well, I don't need a package to compute distances between these points. I can just use, Pythagorean theorem, and I can just use my Pythagorean theorem for that. Well, Pythagorean theorem gives you a Euclidean distance, and the surface of the Earth actually curves. And so Euclidean distance starts to produce large errors. Once you get outside of pretty much the range of a city, you'll start to get errors. So this spdist actually computes these distances between these 2 matrices and uses the curvature of the Earth in those calculations and provides that a distance value. So I'm just going to actually run this real quick. Oops, let's see. Let me just run that. Yeah, sorry. So I'm just going to run this code, and so now this is D, and so let's just take a look at D. And again, this is just to show you kind of the basics of how. Oops, what did I do? The basics of how these joins work, and then we'll show you some more exotic things more at the surface level. let's see, why did this not work? All right. Oh, that's interesting. Of course, when you do live demos, something always doesn't show up right. Oh, here I might need to actually run this to convert it to a data frame. Oops. Huh, that's strange.
I can see it in the data on the right, so it's there. But if you click on that little right-hand white box next to it, and the data view, it might does the same thing.
There it goes. It was just taking a while to show up because there's so many of these. That's the issue. Okay, so there's so many of these. It was taking a while. Sorry. So what this is a big matrix of all of the source points that are in one column, and then these are the distance matrices. So if I go to here, let me actually bring this, do a couple more lines here and run this. And let's view this. So now I'll be a little more patient and give it a second to show all this. Okay. So what you have here is longitude and latitude of these individual cities. And what you have here, these codes are unique identifier codes for the hospital. So each hospital has a unique identifier code that's been assigned here. So from hospital with ID 3002, this is its distance from Marysville. And you have all of these values. So there's tons of values here. This is actually only showing the first 50 columns. There's thousands of hospitals, thousands of cities. So, taking that and let's make this a little bit more manageable in my script. I'd use melt to turn this into a tall data format. And now let's look at this again. Okay, so now this is a little more illustrative of what I'm doing. So you see the source ID, you see each individual city here. You see the latitude and longitude of that city. And then this is the hospital that is within this is a hospital that's at this distance. And so there's all this 3001. This is for each of those. That's for all 1,000 cities. I can scroll down here. This is the next hospital. Those are all the distances. So next, all I really want to do is filter it by my distance, my buffer distance. So, I can take it down here and run this line, and this is going to be everything that's within 30 kilometers. And viewing this, now we see this has been brought down to just where there is hospitals within 30 kilometers. So this is a simplified list here. And you see that the 3001, these three hospitals are actually close to three different cities, are within the bounds of three different cities. So how do I kind of maintain that? How do I look at that? That'll be something that I'm going to show when I get back to Spotfire. All this stuff does here is it basically takes, I'll just run this real quick. This takes those all those joins and all those values, and it gives me a, let's see, let me do it actually. Let me just run this. It'll give me this table, which has all of the unique identifiers for the hospital, and then I just concatenated. So there's three different cities that were close to it. Those are the three cities, and this allows me to join it back into my data in my Spotfire data table, which I'll show in a second. And I went ahead and just did the inverse. So for each city, so for Marysville, these are the hospitals that are within that distance. So I just take that and I actually drop off the first column. I just keep those these concatenated values here, and I drop those off, and then I also while I'm at it, I just write out this whole all results table, which has just everything in it, in case I wanted to use that data again. So going back here in the Spotfire, you can see that there is. Let me go here in columns. This column is added. So this is the concatenated values for the cities that match up to the hospitals. So let's throw this a little bit bigger. So these are each individual hospitals, and these are all the cities that are within those distances. And you see blanks where there's no cities that are around those hospitals. So these are now all joined together. Now I can go ahead and look here, and I've colored these values by that. I've colored the hospitals by the cities they're close to. So you'll see here, you'll see that there's 2 green points here. There's some kind of purple points here, and then these are kind of like light purple. And that's because these two hospitals are closest to this city only. These 2 hospitals are closest to this city only, but these 2 are not closest to any other city. And then these 3 in the middle are actually close to both of them. So they've actually been given their own unique value here. So that data has been joined in together there, and I basically just, I took that data function and I threw it into this, I took that script and I threw it into this data function where I specify the, layer 1 X, layer 1 Y, layer 1 ID. The same thing for layer 2. I specify my buffer distance, which is tied again to this document property. And you can see then the outputs all kind of come through. The columns get added to the right table. So this column is the concatenated cities gets written into the hospital data. This one gets written into the US cities data. So that is that spatial join. Now, taking this even a step further, what we've done in the COVID dashboard is we've looked at, so in the past I showed how to use the TIBCO Geoanalytics builder to do routing, to find routes between points. That was, and I think roughly a year ago, I think maybe it was last April. Oh no, it was August. So creating driving routes. And so that's a more detail on how to use the TIBCO Geoanalytics builder. But the TIBCO Geoanalytics builder will also pull in trade areas. And trade areas are the distance that one could travel from a certain point, and if they traveled in any direction, and if they were either walking or driving. So here we're driving. If someone was leaving the center of New York and they were going 6.3 miles and they drove in any direction, this is where they could actually drive to. So it's a little bit better than just having a fixed circle, because it actually shows your travel distance and what you could reasonably travel, given especially all these geographical boundaries, right? The water and the bridges, whatnot. So what this does is you can go into, I can select maybe like Boston, and I want to see things that are within 8 miles, and I can run this. And this is going to go pull in from the trade areas. Again, this is on the TIBCO Geoanalytics builder. You can find this by searching TIBCO Geoanalytics builder, and it'll give you the kind of API commands for this. But it's basically pulling a series of points that are this boundary. And then we have a function that Peter's going to show that actually takes those points and converts those points into a polygon. After those points are converted into a polygon, we can use the points and polygons that we used earlier with the US counties to assign the counties to the hospitals. We can use the points and polygons to find the hospitals that are within this boundary. So these are all different hospitals. The ones that are within this boundary are given have an ID value. It's just an ID 1. And so we've colored based off of that ID. So just to be illustrative, these are the hospitals that are within that polygon boundary, that traveling boundary. And then this is showing right here the capacity. So this filters, this chart just filters to where the ID is not null. So basically, whenever there's whenever it's inside the polygon, it has an ID of 1, and when that ID is not null, then show just those hospitals. So traveling from the center of Boston, these are the licensed beds, staff beds, and ICU beds that are all within that driving distance, 8-mile driving distance. And just to show this change, if I did, let's say Miami, and I ran this. Actually, I'll run something like Dallas, because Dallas will show you, Dallas is not by large bodies of water. So when you run this, the boundary for Dallas will actually be pretty round, which I thought was interesting. So this is Dallas, it's pretty round if you drove from the center because there's no water. But here you can see, I think this is a Trinity River in Dallas, and you can see that there is some travel constraints around that river. But you might have noticed here that the hospital beds all changed based off of that calculation. Now, what if you want to join things that are not in a polygon? You want to join things that are like, points, but you want to join them to a line. So a line has there in Spotfire. These are there's a polylines. So as well as polygons, there's polylines. And this is rivers in Scotland, and I have these points. You can kind of barely see these points that are along the rivers. This green point, this red one. These are polling stations, which are taking measurements of pollutants in the river. But it's not really linked up to any river. So how do I know where a polling station actually corresponds to a river? So there is some functionality where you can actually extract the vertices from the lines. For illustrative purposes, I just have this where I select something and it extracts the vertices from the line. And then you can do the same type of join where you match the points. Well, now I have a set of points in one layer and a set of points in another layer, and then I can just join those to find the nearest one. So this one is a little bit different, and to extract the points, this is going to, again, use the SP package, and you can find this type of stuff online by just, this is not something that's on our exchange, but you can find it online by just Googling this. And what it does is just take the line geometries, these spatial lines, and it takes those lines and it goes through this function which extracts all the points. But I also have something in here which will actually interpolate any missing rows. So a vertice is only where there's any changes in the curvature here. And that might be sporadically distributed all around here. You might only get maybe 10 points on 10 different vertices, but I really want a point every, I don't know, 10 feet or 100 feet or so. So I've just interpolated those points in between there. So unfortunately, we're not gonna have time to go like full, like in a lot of detail here, but kind of showing you that this is possible. So here is where I have these points. I just calculated the points for all of the river geometries that are shown, these little black dots, and these big red circles are the polling stations for the pollutants. And you can move this around and you'll see this little fuzzy red area move. And that's because this is doing a spatial join from these polling stations to the nearest river points. And so within these distances, these are all the river points that are closest to. And I just take the minimum value there to find the nearest river. And then that allows me to actually take it a step further. And rather than just have a fixed line where I don't really know the pollutants along a certain line, I can actually impute the values, and I can start to interpolate values of the pollutants along this line by using those individual points and those individual rows in R. One more thing, and then I'll hand it off to Peter. This is actually something Peter built, and this was looking at oil wells and where to drill. If you have too many wells close together, then you can't necessarily drill between them. So you need to look at how far these wells are spaced. And this uses something that is, this data function is pretty similar to what we've already shown. It just kind of calculates a matrix, a grid of all of these points, and then calculates those distances from where the well is. And then you can use a filter to take out some of these distances. So if I want to see things that are greater than, maybe 145 feet, this excludes everything that is within 145 feet of a well, and shows that there's these other areas where someone could possibly drill. So lots of exotic things that you can start to do by using R and these geospatial capabilities. There is a pointer here. This is, I'm going to put these links in while Peter presents. This is a spatial cheat sheet that I like, and this shows how to use that SP package and some other packages and convert these points that you might have in just a regular Spotfire table, convert them into a spatial data frame, or take lines and convert those into spatial lines data frames and polygons data frames, and then you can start to manipulate these objects a little bit better. These type of data frames are designed to handle spatial transformations and calculations. Okay, with that, Peter, I think I'll hand off to you.
Sure, thanks, Neil. Good, so I'm going to be talking about, let me share my screen here. Some of the topics, not quite so heavy on the R, but what I thought I'd do is I'd show a few things, sort of workflows that I use, and I'll be using just some basic census tract data locations. I'll be starting from a blank Spotfire file and just using some census tract locations and doing a few things, including Google Streeview. There is a new capability with Spotfire 10.8, so you can actually bring in a JPEG image. You can just download like a map or some kind of thing from the internet or whatever, and overlay this on top of Spotfire. So I'll show you how this is very useful. The example is like from a year or two ago, there was a map showing fire risks, so which areas of the communities were at risk for having the power shut down and needed to evacuate. So you actually quickly overlay that on the map and show, identify those regions. So I'll be doing that with just marking, and also, as Neil was mentioning setting up a reference polygon. So let's get started. I'm going to make this full screen. Here's my Spotfire 10.8. I'm going to basically add a, you can see I've been doing this already. I got a few census points from, and these are actually census tract data points from the census. I just got a simple latitude, longitude, and some identifiers. Let me just, yeah, Neil's typing some fun stuff there. So here's my data file. I can take a quick look at that just to see just the points. And if I bring up a map chart, it knows that these are latitude, longitude, so it'll make some points. These are just like communities in the Bay Area. And what I'm going to do here is a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to make this a bit smaller layers. So I'm going to go to settings and basically make the sizes a bit, get rid of this, make the sizes a bit smaller just because they kind of overlap each other. Maybe cool, and maybe a bit more pleasant color. I don't know, blue's pretty good. So here we go. And one of the fun things that Andrew Barrage discovered on our team is that you can actually bring up a Google Street View. You can like literally type in any location, but we have these locations here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a calculated column just inside Spotfire. And so I've got the latitude, longitude columns here. I could, build this by hand, but looks like I used the wrong names there. So I can basically, for the Y center, I'm going to use the latitude, and for the X center, I'm going to use the longitude. And this is the format. I didn't do that, did I? Actually, let me just do this. Now that I'm confusing myself, let me just start at this again. I need to push the push the button. So the latitude is the Y, and the X is going to be the longitude. You got to push that insert button there. Okay, so here's my expression. I'm going to can't this Google thing there, and I'm just going to call this a Streeview URL. It's a URL. So there we go. And if I go back to my table, I'll see it's got a nice little URL there. So I'm going to actually not use the table way to get to this. I'm going to get it from the map itself. So if I bring up my visualization pieces again, oops, sorry, I'm going to go to my properties and bring up the layer itself in question. I want to add when I click on something, I want to have it show up the URL, right? So that'll be the labels. Show it for the ones I've marked. I can't do that yet, so I'm going to do it by my Streeview URL, which gets very messy. Let's just do the ones I've marked. And actually, just to quickly show all, these are, you can't click on these yet. So I need to actually, one of the secret sauce things here is to show as. And I can show this as a link, and it turned blue, and I set up the marked row. So we're good to go now. So now I can kind of zoom into some area and maybe click on, I don't know, some parts of the city, and maybe click on this. I'll get up, knock on wood, a Google Street View. So it's like I've like literally started with just a latitude, longitude point, and I get this Street View of an area in San Francisco, like parking garage and so forth, and you can try, so you can kind of almost recognize where that is. So that's kind of fun. We actually used this because we were studying traffic patterns of one study we did. There were some certain intersections were particularly dangerous. We had a record of the number of fatalities and number of accidents and stuff. So we actually said, hey, let's actually be able to click on the offending intersection and see if we can understand what's going on there. So that was quite useful for that. Good. So the other part is just bring up so it's kind of back to us off a second and to think of another scenario, which is to say that California was affected by these brush fires and forest fires and stuff a year or two ago. And certain communities were really at risk for the fires. And I've got a JPEG image I have. So from the Census Chronicle, I think, PG&E provided this map of the areas at risk. We'd like to use this information on the map and basically use it to identify some of these communities at risk. So what I can do with Spotfire 10.8, I can basically bring up the layers. What I want to do is I want to add a new layer, which is going to be that, it's like literally a JPEG file. So I'm going to add an image layer, and it wants me to browse for that, so I can basically browse. Now this has been around, this type of thing has been around for a while, and it wants to know, am I going to use this as a background? In this case, I'm not, so I'm going to type no. So if it does, it has to be certain, coordinate reference system. And in the past, you have to type in these numbers and so forth. I'm just going to say, no. I'm just going to put it on the map. And the beauty is, you know what I should have done? I should have made this a bit more transparent so I can see what I'm doing. Here's my layer. Go to my transparency and make it a little more kind of transparent. So I can, what I want to do is I want to basically scale and shift around so these two things line up. Let me just zoom out a bit because the map is a different scale completely. So here's the deal. Here it is in the layer. Like Neil showed before, if I right click, I can actually edit the image position. So I'm going to click on that. And I can just like move this around, and I need to probably zoom out a little bit because it's a pretty different scale. And I want to make this bigger. I'm basically looking for, that wasn't pretty useful. I want to make this guy match up, which is actually, it's not bad. Look at that. So it's pretty good, maybe a bit smaller. When I'm happy with that, it's pretty good. I'm going to just say uncheck that. So here we go. So the point of all this is that I can say, here's this area, particularly down here. There's a big power station down here. Oops, I didn't really get that correctly lined up. So one could go nuts a little bit, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that's the right. It's obviously not, but that's good enough for now. What I can do is I've still got my layers. I can still mark my census points. So I could go through and I could either get a lasso and lasso my points, right? So I can say, okay, these points are. It's actually doing anything. Oh, of course I got them. So yeah, I got that turned on. But I could lasso the points and identify the points inside there. But let's say I want to make this a bit more permanent and actually set up a polygon to do this. I might have a million points. I want to have this, you know, I may or not want to rely on my marking of the day. I just want to set up a polygon. So what I'll do here is if I want to basically take this area in particular and click around here, let's make a polygon for the Santa Cruz Mountains. Okay, so in Spotfire, if you right click, you can actually, you know, copy the map coordinates and just, I'm not saving these obviously, but I'll show you in a second what's going on. So I can copy them and then paste into a buffer. And I believe in my next slide, I just kind of collated these collection of points. So I've gone through, clicked around. I've added a just a label here, Santa Cruz Mountains. And in fact, if I were to put in a bunch of additional regions, I could label those separately. So let's say I've got that. So that's saved to a separate file. I'm going to actually then add that file to, actually what I can just do is I can just, here it is in my other editor. I can just copy and just paste it into, Spotfire, Control-C, Control-V. And there you go, from the clipboard. And let's just do a quick sanity check to see if it's all there. It's just called data table, lat, lon, and region. Let me just quickly show how that looks. So here's the thing I just put in there. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the useful. So again, the TIPCO location analytics page here, which has a collection of pretty much everything here. At the bottom, there's these collection of data functions, which is here. And in fact, I'm going to use convert polygon coordinates to polygon geometries, which I have lying around. Just keep that there. So I'm going to go to my data, data function properties. I'm going to register a new one, import, and with any luck, it'll be, here we go. I've got a few ones lying around just so I have this handy. So the .sfd is the Spotfire function definition, which is what you download from the Exchange. Open this up. It's got a bunch of helpful stuff here. There's a polygon ID, a ring ID, etc. So I'm going to then actually, to use this, I've got to actually run this. And polygon ID is going to be just the region name. Skip the ring ID, it's not required. Longitude is going to be lon. Latitude is going to be lat. The output is going to be a new table just called geometry table. And close this up. And if I look at that over somewhere here, let's say, I can, so what happens is all of these points, you know, like whatever, it's like 15 lines of points here get put into a single line of this table. So if I have, you know, multiple regions here, I can then build up multiple lines of the table. And if I look at the column properties, as Neil was talking about, the geometry, click on the geometry, click on the properties. Again, the secret sauce is that it's got a couple of things here, the application /XWKB, which is well-known binary, and the geometry type ID. So that way you get to see this shape there, plus you get to be able to go to the geometry table and just drag that geometry column right over the map. And if I line things up correctly, there it is. So I've got my, get rid of all this stuff.
So this is just taken some points and drawn that geometry. It's created a polygon from those points, correct?
Exactly. So I can just literally go to the map by hand, click around, and then convert this to a polygon, which I can then use with the points and polygons data function to, you know, more formally do that. So if I went to, you know, at that point, turn off the image, which is a bit distracting, let's say, and Yeah, no, I didn't actually plot the points of that thing, but you can plot the points if you want to as well. So yeah, you can use that to then do the points and polygons to identify these things. Let me quickly show. Well, let's see. I've got like 4 minutes left. I guess it's probably a good time to. Should I break? I guess I should probably stop talking and open for questions. Neil, is that the good time?
Yeah, I think we've been taking the questions in the chat. We'll need to wrap up in the next 3 minutes, but if I'm sorry, I think I ate a lot of the time. But if you want to show something, you can get in a couple minutes.
Yeah, there's another application of this. We're working with Florida State University, Vasu Misra there, and he's using some NASA, some really nice data from NASA about forecasting, predicting things like meteorological conditions and rainfall over the Florida area. And one thing he wanted to know was they've got certain basins, certain watershed basins inside here, and the ability to collect the precipitation is very useful. So I got an image, which again I found of this. Hopefully, I clicked. It's doing something. There's a little map I found of the Peace River watershed basin, which is one of the areas of interest. So I just was able to bring that map in, overlay it over this Spotfire thing, and then I just was able to, in this case, just click around and just mark this grid of data points here. And if I then focus in on just the parts I've marked, I can see the precipitation within this region based on that map. So I've got the map, I've got the points there, and then I can do things like aggregate the data points to get the net rainfall inside there, that kind of thing. So that's going to be very useful for the study.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that they were trying to study these type of things for transportation, logistics, and other uses, and this whole feature came in really handy.
Exactly. And if I make this even a little bit bigger, it'll make it a bit more obvious what's going on there. So you can basically see the patterns. This is again from the NASA supercomputer forecasting of the precipitation, and you can actually go into a very specific region. Even across this, you can see some subtle variations in the forecast of precipitation. And then once you've got this region saved as a polygon or marking whatever, you can then build up a time series using additional days forecasts. So that's the kind of way you use that.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone that joined. I know this was a bit more of a technical session. Hopefully, it gives you a lot of future guidance you can build off of. There's really tons of things you can do with R, and we didn't even touch on the Python capabilities with Geo yet. The recording will be published on YouTube at this channel, and next time we are going to be showing how to build and optimize information links for information services in Spotfire. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we will see you next time.